The Great Depression was, in its broadest sense, a period of deafening national anxiety, punctuated by the relentless noise of factory silence, bread lines, and the churning fear in the cities. Yet, within the federal government, particularly in the marble halls of the U.S. Treasury Department, the crisis manifested as an equally profound yet entirely different kind of noise. The rhythmic, precise clatter of adding machines, the scratch of thousands of pens, and the rustling of ledgers, the sound of meticulous accounting attempting to impose order upon economic collapse. The year was 1933. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, facing a banking system on the brink of complete annihilation, issued Executive Order 6102, famously demanding the surrender of gold coins, bullion, and certificates by the American public. This act, known as the Gold Recall, was a sweeping, visible operation intended to consolidate the nation's monetary base and restore faith in the paper currency. The operation was publicly documented, widely debated, and resulted in billions of dollars worth of gold being centralized in Federal Reserve banks and, eventually, Fort Knox. But as with any massive, visible governmental operation, there existed a shadow, a process so sensitive, so strategically critical to national solvency, that its records were not just classified, but actively obfuscated. Our story begins in the most unremarkable place imaginable, a discrepancy in the Treasury ledger. The ledger in question, a massive bound volume labeled simply Miscellaneous Bullion Deposits 1933 to 1934, was preserved not as an official policy record, but as a minor piece of evidentiary material concerning the internal audit standards of the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. It was a secondary document, dull enough to evade the attention of generations of historians and investigative journalists. The research into this particular anomaly was spearheaded by Dr. Miles Thorne, an economist whose primary work focused on the nonlinear stability curves of interwar fiat currency, a field as specialized and slow as the content requires. Dr. Thorne discovered the discrepancy during a detailed, methodical reconstruction of the nation's gold movement during the critical stabilization months following the executive order. The main challenge for the Treasury in 1933 was logistics. Hundreds of tons of gold collected from countless banks and private citizens had to be assayed, certified, and transported to the new federal repositories. The official records account for $6.8 billion in gold reserves being consolidated in the main Federal Reserve repositories. However, in the seemingly innocuous Miscellaneous Bullion Deposits ledger, Dr. Thorne noted a small, recurring, and entirely unexplained entry across 18 consecutive months. The entry did not detail the source of the gold, like New York Federal Reserve or Philadelphia Mint, but simply recorded a deposit under a code, TX421. The value of these TX421 deposits was not large enough to flag any major audit alarm. It never exceeded 0.005% of the total monthly consolidation. But the consistency was the anomaly. Every month, for 18 months, a deposit arrived from an unlisted location logged under the same unassigned code, always on the 28th day of the month. The entries read like this, repeated across the pages. Month, August 1933. Date, 28th. Deposit code, TX421. Weight, 745.2 ounces. Assay value, $25,123.00. Month, September 1933. Date, 28th. Deposit code, TX421. Weight, 745.2 ounces. Assay value, $25,123.00. Note, the weight remained suspiciously identical for many months, only fluctuating slightly after the first year. This was the paper trail to nowhere. The entries were perfect, clean, and utterly untraceable to any known federal, commercial, or military source. Every other entry in the Treasury archives could be cross-referenced back to a Federal Reserve branch, a major mining operation, or a private seizure. TX 421 stood alone, a financial ghost. Dr. Thorne theorized that TX 421 represented not a routine deposit, but the product of a secret, systematic gold sourcing operation, a covert parallel initiative deemed too sensitive or too politically risky to be publicly associated with the New Deal administration. The necessity for such a secret operation stemmed from a deeper, unspoken fear in 1933, the fear of secondary flight. While the government was seizing gold from the public, there was a quiet, desperate rush by industrial and strategic entities, defense contractors, specialized scientific labs, foreign allies, to secure their own strategic reserves of precious and highly specialized metals that were not covered by the executive order. The nation's ability to wage future war or maintain technological superiority was dependent on these niche, non-monetary metals. TX 421 was likely the product of a covert federal response attempting to secure a strategic reserve of precious metals outside the official books and away from the public eye, often involving non-traditional sources or highly sensitive diplomatic exchanges. The location of this operation became the focus of the historical inquiry. Following the logic of the entry, the steady, low-level flow of metal, Dr. Thorne discounted major metropolitan areas. The operation had to originate from a place where transport was discreet, not a major rail hub or port where security would attract attention. Sourcing was non-traditional, not a known major gold mine, which was already accounted for. The operation was stable. The consistency of the deposit suggested a reliable, continuous extraction or acquisition point. The geographical search, slow and methodical, began to point toward the American heartland, the vast, empty landscapes of the Midwest and mountain states, where obscurity was the best form of security. The simplicity of the code, TX 421, suggested a simple routing number or a highly compartmentalized internal division. The discrepancy in the Treasury ledger was the final, quiet vibration of this massive, secret undertaking. It spoke of a calculated risk. A fraction of the nation's true assets was moved outside the official protective mechanism, trusting that the small, recurring discrepancy would be overlooked amidst the billions of dollars and the chaos of the Great Depression. The existence of TX 421 was a testament to the fact that the history of the New Deal was not just about public speeches and monumental infrastructure projects, but also about the silent, anxious hand of government working in the shadows, creating paper trails to nowhere to secure the nation's future solvency. The narrative must now follow this trace, transitioning from the quiet of the Treasury archives to the empty roads and silent operation zones of the American landscape, seeking the anonymous individuals who were the architects of the unmarked route.
The existence of the TX 421 discrepancy in the 1933 Treasury ledgers, the monthly, steady, and unlisted gold deposits, demanded a geographical explanation. This recurring anomaly was the financial echo of an operation that unfolded not in the vault-lined canyons of Wall Street, but on the dust-choked, forgotten roads of the American interior. The secrecy required for TX 421 meant the operation relied on obscurity and redundancy, qualities that defined the lives of the men and women who became the architects of the unmarked route. Dr. Miles Thorne theorized that TX 421 was a logistics designation, T for Treasury, X for experimental or exempt, and 421 as an internal routing number designed never to cross-reference with official bank transfers. The operation's core purpose was not merely to transport gold, but to secure specialized strategic metals, platinum, palladium, high-grade uranium concentrates, and unusual mineral assays that Roosevelt's administration knew would be essential for future technological and military preparedness, metals that could not be sourced through conventional, traceable channels. The design of the transport system required minds skilled in the arts of invisibility and non-detection, professionals whose lives were predicated on moving valuable assets across the country with minimal fuss. The architect of obscurity, Arthur Vance. The first quiet architect identified by Dr. Thorne was Arthur Vance, a retired superintendent from the U.S. Postal Service's Railway Mail Service, RMS. The RMS was a deeply respected but now rapidly fading institution in the 1930s, defined by its complex, highly organized, and efficient logistical pathways. Vance was brought out of quiet retirement not for his ability to route mail, but for his intimate knowledge of what the official map omitted. He was a master of the secondary, the tertiary, and the entirely unmarked routes of the nation, the vast network of rural roads, obsolete train spurs, and forgotten county lines that existed outside the official gaze of the Federal Highway Administration and major rail companies. Vance's plan was brilliant in its banality. He rejected armed military convoys, which scream valuable cargo. Instead, he devised the quiet convoys. Vehicle selection, not armored trucks, but 2 or 3 plain, well-maintained Ford Model BB trucks painted in dull, common colors, forest green or beige, deliberately aged to look like slow-moving local delivery vehicles, lumber or feed. The timing was always on Tuesday and Wednesday, the 2 quietest days on American roads, and traveled exclusively between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. They avoided all major cities, state capitals, and federal buildings. The route design was designed to be non-linear. A journey from Missouri to a destination in Ohio might zigzag through Kentucky, Indiana, and even skirt the edge of Illinois, using back roads and farm tracks that added days to the journey but guaranteed obscurity. The roads chosen were so slow and poorly maintained that no one would suspect high-value cargo would ever use them. The security was equally subtle. The guards were not military police, but unassuming former RMS mail clerks, men chosen for their meticulous organizational skills, their discipline, and their ability to blend seamlessly into any dusty small town. Their weapons were concealed, and their demeanor was one of profound, professional boredom, the ultimate camouflage. The architect of obscurity, Arthur Vance. The challenge remained. Where did the precious metals coded TX421 actually originate? Dr. Thorne's research pointed to the second quiet architect, Dr. Clara Olson, a forgotten geological chemist from the University of Arizona. Dr. Olson had spent the 1920s studying the complex, non-conventional mineralogy of the desert Southwest and the mountain states, areas rich with platinum group metals, molybdenum, and other strategic alloys often overlooked by the high-volume gold and silver mines. Her work, considered too academic and commercially useless at the time, suddenly became vital when the threat of European conflict loomed. Dr. Olson's task was to manage the acquisition and processing of these niche metals. She organized a network of small, independent prospectors and struggling miner mines that dealt exclusively in these secondary metals. These operations were too small to be noticed by the Federal Reserve's massive gold recall apparatus. She created a central mobile assay unit,
a rolling assay office housed in a customized unmarked trailer. This trailer would periodically meet the prospectors at predetermined remote crossroads in places like eastern Nevada or western Utah. Here, the metals were assayed, weighed, explaining the consistent 745.2 ounces recorded in the ledger, a standardized batch weight for easy handling, and logged under TX 421 code before being transferred to the waiting quiet convoys. Dr. Olson's involvement ensured the metals were high-grade, certified, and sourced from places that were, geographically, nowhere on the national map of significant commerce. Her work was the genesis of the discrepancy, the methodical, scientific sourcing of vital, unlisted assets. The rhythm of the convoys. The monthly operation was a ballet of boredom and precision. A typical segment of the route might involve the rendezvous, a quiet convoy pulling off a barely paved county road onto a gravel track beside an abandoned silo near Omaha, Nebraska. The meeting time was precise, but the vehicles would always wait 20 minutes extra, observing the absolute quietude of the surrounding landscape before making the transfer. The transfer, the metal, often small, heavy, cloth-wrapped bars of platinum or sealed canisters of uranium concentrate, was quickly and silently transferred by the former RMS clerks, who treated the process with the same disciplined routine as sorting mail. The camouflage, the empty Ford truck would often immediately pull into the nearest small-town diner, where the men would order lunch and discuss the weather in deliberately loud, mundane terms, further establishing their cover as ordinary travelers. The quiet convoys became a silent, necessary lifeline, a continuous pulse of strategic material flowing from the periphery of the Depression-era economy into the hidden core of the state. These journeys, spanning thousands of miles across the heartland, represent a hidden geography of American financial power, a map defined not by efficiency, but by secrecy. The architect of obscurity, Vance, and the architect of the source, Olson, never publicly existed in this capacity. Their work was buried in operational silence. Their sacrifice was the ultimate anonymity, the acceptance that their massive contribution to the nation's stability would be recorded only in a tiny, coded entry in a forgotten ledger. The narrative must now follow the final quiet destination of these vital materials, seeking the final vault that housed the nation's unsung strategic reserve.
The meticulous silence of the quiet convoys, the dull green Ford trucks, the mundane schedules, and the disciplined obscurity engineered by Arthur Vance and Dr. Clara Olson all led toward a singular, concealed endpoint. The paper trail to nowhere, marked by the TX 421 code in the Treasury ledger, demanded a corresponding physical destination, a repository so secure, so geographically insulated, that it could hold the nation's most sensitive strategic reserves outside the public record. This destination was the final vault, a symbol of the government's desperate, quiet attempt to stabilize the future while the present collapsed. Dr. Miles Thorne's long search for this final destination began by analyzing the logical endpoint of Vance's nonlinear routes. While the convoys zigzagged across the Midwest, avoiding major hubs, the general direction of flow was consistently westward, toward the central spine of the continental United States. The gold was not heading toward the obvious Federal Reserve sites, or even the nascent construction of Fort Knox in Kentucky, which itself was a project designed to reassure the public, not conceal the deepest secrets. The analysis led Dr. Thorne to focus on a region defined by its profound lack of historical significance and its geological stability, the high plains bordering the Dakotas and eastern Montana. This area was sparsely populated, possessed minimal major infrastructure, further discouraging curiosity, and crucially, boasted massive, ancient granite bedrock,
geologically perfect for subterranean protection against potential seismic activity, or more critically, aerial bombardment, a nascent fear of the 1930s. The architect of the vault, the forgotten geologist. The key to pinpointing the vault was a third and equally obscure architect, Dr. Alistair Finch, a geologist attached to the U.S. Geological Survey, whose official records show him engaged in routine, low-priority topographical mapping in the northern plains during the early 1930s. Dr. Finch, no relation to the previously mentioned historical figure, but a striking instance of historical parallelism, was in reality the site selection engineer for the TX-421 operation. His task was to find the perfect convergence of invisibility and security. His specifications were simple and extreme. Zero public footprint. The site had to be far from any existing infrastructure, military base, or population center. Granite shell, deep granite bedrock that could be hollowed out and lined to be entirely resistant to conventional penetration and environmental decay. Non-federal appearance. The surface structure had to be utterly unremarkable, easily mistaken for a simple agricultural outpost or a defunct mining shack. Dr. Finch settled on a remote location in South Dakota, a region generally known for its rugged beauty and isolation, but not its strategic assets. The specific coordinates, later pieced together from cryptic references in his field notes, pointed to a location near a sprawling, empty stretch of federally owned land designated for grazing, a place where silence was the primary feature. The vault, constructed in absolute secrecy over 2 years using a skeleton crew of trusted, compartmentalized federal engineers, was not an elaborate Fort Knox complex. It was a single, deep subterranean chamber, accessed through a vertical shaft disguised by a small corrugated iron shed, the only surface structure designed to look like a forgotten pump house. The interior chamber was lined with reinforced concrete and steel, but the ultimate security rested on the 10,000 tons of solid granite surrounding it. The TX-421 convoys, arriving monthly after their long, silent journeys, would back their inconspicuous Model BB trucks directly into the shed, where the metal was lowered by a silent winch into the cold, deep vault. The metal of necessity, the strategic reserve. The vault's inventory, pieced together from the slight weight fluctuations in the TX-421 ledger and internal memoranda, confirms the strategic purpose. Non-monetary gold and platinum, gold of a purity level too high for monetary coinage, reserved for scientific tooling, electronics, and specialized alloys. Uranium concentrates, small but vital caches of uranium ore, secured long before the Manhattan Project, secured for future energy and defense research. Palladium and rhodium, specialized catalytic metals, essential for chemical and industrial processing. The final vault was not a repository of the Depression's financial wealth. It was the seed bank for America's future technological security, a testament to the government's foresight regarding the industrial demands of World War II and the atomic age. The enduring silence. The TX-421 deposits abruptly ceased in March 1935, exactly 18 months after the operation began. The last entry in the miscellaneous bullion deposits ledger for the code reads simply TX-421, final transfer complete. The operation dissolved as quietly as it began. Arthur Vance returned to his retirement. Dr. Olson continued her obscure geological research. Dr. Finch returned to routine topographical mapping. The only trace left was the coded anomaly in the ledger. The enduring silence of the American heartland became the final and crucial component of the security plan. The government never acknowledged the existence of the TX-421 reserve. The gold that was supposed to have gone to Fort Knox did go to Fort Knox. The existence of this parallel strategic reserve remains to this day unlisted in official U.S. Treasury tallies.
Dr. Thorne, using the power of the digitized historical record and modern geological surveys, confirmed the logical location of the vault. Aerial thermal imaging of the isolated South Dakota site, combined with the historical data, revealed a subtle, localized thermal anomaly, consistent with a deep, large chamber of dense, cold metal. However, Dr. Thorne's final decision mirrored the ethical silence of the shadow architect, Elias Thorne, from the previous narrative. He concluded that the true historical value of the 1935 final vault was not its contents, but its secret. To publicize the location would destabilize the historical narrative, create a modern security risk, and betray the profound anonymity of the architects who sacrificed their fame for the nation's quiet stability. Dr. Thorne published his findings in a meticulously detailed academic paper, disclosing the ledger discrepancy, the methodology of the convoys, and the purpose of the operation, but deliberately obscuring the final, precise coordinates. The location of the final vault remains protected, known only through the abstract geological data and the cryptic entries in the silent ledger. The story concludes with the immense peaceful realization that deep within the barren landscapes of the American heartland lies a silent, granite-encased testament to the quiet desperation and foresight of the Great Depression, a vault holding the nation's hidden technological destiny, guarded by the enduring silence of a perfectly orchestrated secret history.